$1.81 trillion. Let that number sit for a second. Not the national debt, not corporate debt, not the deficit. The debt held by individual Americans, most of them between 22 and 50, who were told at 17 or 18 years old that borrowing tens of thousands of dollars to go to college was the responsible thing to do. Student loans have become the second largest form of consumer debt in the entire United States, trailing only mortgages, $1.81 trillion, over 45 million Americans in repayment, and it is getting worse every single quarter. In 2025, federal student debt saw a year-over-year increase in every single fiscal quarter for the first time since 2022. The total student loan debt balance grew 282% over the last 20 years. 282% in 20 years. For debt that was supposed to be an investment in your future, this is not a financial crisis. This is a generational crime. And today we are going to talk about exactly how it happened, who benefited, who is suffering, and what nobody in power wants to admit out loud. Let us start at the beginning, because this did not happen by accident. College tuition costs have been climbing from roughly $11,840 a year in 1981 to $24,920 a year at in-state public schools for the 2024 to 2025 academic year. College tuition inflation averages about 8% annually, consistently running higher than general inflation for decades, 8% per year, every year, for decades. To understand why, you have to understand what happened in the 1980s. Before federal student loans became widely available, universities had a problem. They could not charge whatever they wanted because students could only pay what they or their families actually had. There was a natural price ceiling set by reality. Then the federal government expanded student loan access. Suddenly, money was available to almost anyone who wanted to go to college, regardless of whether they could actually afford to repay it. And universities did exactly what any business does when someone else is footing the bill. In 1987, the Secretary of Education, William Bennett, argued that increases in financial aid had enabled colleges to raise their tuitions, confident that federal loan subsidies would help cushion the increase. Federal student aid had risen 57% since 1980, while inflation had been just 26%. That argument was made almost 40 years ago. Nobody listened. And college kept getting more expensive. In the 21st century, the cost of college has increased 41.7% faster than the cost of inflation. The entire system was built on one assumption, that a college degree would lead to income high enough to repay the debt. And for a while, in certain fields, that was true. It is less and less true today. Now, here is where it gets criminal. Most Americans do not know this, and the people who profit from student loans are extremely happy that most Americans do not know this. Unlike all other forms of debt, student loans are not discharged in bankruptcy. Lenders can garnish wages and seize earned income tax credits and Social Security benefits for repayment on loans. Read that again. You can borrow $200,000 to start a business that fails completely and discharge that debt in bankruptcy and start over. You can run up $50,000 in credit card debt buying things you did not need and discharge it in bankruptcy. You can have catastrophic medical debt from a health crisis you did not choose and discharge it in bankruptcy. But if you borrowed $40,000 at 17 years old to attend a university that told you it was the path to a good life, that debt follows you forever. If you default on federal student loans and you receive Social Security benefits, the federal government may collect 15% of your benefits above $750. This is known as a Social Security offset. The government also uses tax refund offsets to seize the refunds of people who have defaulted on federal loans. There are Americans in their 60s and 70s having their Social Security checks garnished for student loans they took out decades ago. Retirement income gone for a degree that may not have even helped their career. This is happening right now in America today. 20 states have laws empowering state agencies to revoke or suspend the professional licenses of lawyers, real estate brokers, nurses, teachers, firefighters, and massage therapists for falling behind on student loan payments. More than 8,700 cases were identified where professional licenses were taken away or put at risk of suspension because of student loan default. Think about the insanity of that for a moment. You borrowed money to become a nurse. You cannot repay the debt because nursing does not pay what it should, so the state revokes your nursing license. Now you cannot work as a nurse, so you definitely cannot repay the debt. They took away the very tool you used to service the loan because you could not service the loan. Now, let us talk about who is actually carrying this debt, because the story most people have in their head, the kid who just graduated and owes $30,000, is not the full picture. Americans aged 35 to 49 carry the largest total amount of federal student loan debt, $681.5 billion across 15 million borrowers. Their average balance is $45,433. Borrowers aged 50 to 61 have the highest average balance at $48,672. People in their 50s still paying, decades after graduation, on loans that have been accruing interest the entire time. These are not deadbeats who refuse to pay. These are people who have been paying for 20 and 30 years and still owe more than they originally borrowed because of how interest compounds on student loans. Generation X is quietly drowning in debt. Often called the sandwich generation, these 40 and 50-somethings are financially squeezed by caring for their aging parents and simultaneously covering their children's college tuition, all while still paying off their own mortgages, credit cards, and student loans. The average Gen Xer with outstanding student loans owed over $38,000 in 2025, even though Gen Xers have been out of school much longer than younger borrowers. Out of school for 20 or 30 years, still paying, still owing, because the interest never stopped. And what has this debt actually done to an entire generation's life trajectory? 83% of millennials with student loan debt have put off major investments such as buying a home or starting a business. 72% of millennials have made employment decisions based on their student loan debt. 42% of millennials have chosen not to pursue further education due to student loan debt. 83%, not a few people, not an unlucky minority. 83% of an entire generation making major life decisions. Where to live, whether to have children, whether to start a business, whether to take risks, based on a debt they took on as teenagers. Rising student loan debt is delaying marriage and family formation, which is increasingly becoming an issue of national concern. Young people managing substantial student loan debt have very few options except to spend less. The birth rate is falling. Young people cannot afford homes. Marriages are being delayed. Businesses are not being started. Risks are not being taken. An entire generation is playing defense with their lives because of debt they were told was an investment. Economists compare the rise in student loan debt to the housing bubble that preceded the 2007 to 2009 recession. Each time a consumer's student debt to income ratio increases by 1 percentage point, their consumption declines by 3.7 percentage points. 3.7% decline in consumption for every 1% increase in the debt to income ratio. Multiply that across 45 million borrowers, and you start to understand what student debt is actually doing to the American economy. It is not just a personal finance crisis. It is a macroeconomic anchor dragging on growth, on consumption, on business formation, on the tax base, on the entire engine of the American economy. By the end of 2025, student loan borrowers had defaulted on debts totaling more than $92 billion, bringing the total number of borrowers in default to nearly 9 million people nationwide. 9 million people in default right now. In 2025 alone, up to 9 million borrowers will have defaulted loans sent to collections. This is a looming economic shockwave, and the collections process for student loans is unlike anything else in American finance. Private debt collectors, working on commission, pursuing people for debts that legally cannot be discharged, with the power to garnish wages and seize tax refunds and take Social Security. The government outsourced the collection of this debt to private companies that profit from the pursuit. The longer someone cannot pay, the more the collector makes. The system is not broken. It is a machine, and it is working exactly as the people who designed it intended. Here is the question nobody in government wants to answer. Germany offers free university education to its citizens. Norway does, Denmark does, Finland does, Sweden does. These are not poor countries. These are wealthy, productive, economically competitive nations that made a collective decision that an educated population benefits everyone, and therefore, everyone should help fund it. America made a different decision. America decided that the cost of education should fall entirely on the individual, and then created a financial product to make that possible. A product with no bankruptcy protection, with wage garnishment powers, with social security seizure capabilities, and with interest rates and compounding structures that ensure many borrowers will pay for decades and still owe more than they started with, and then called it opportunity. The most devastating part of all of this is that the people most harmed by this system are the people who believed in it most. The first-generation college students, the people whose families sacrificed, the people who did exactly what they were told, who worked hard in school, applied to college, filled out the FAFSA, signed the papers at 17, and trusted that the adults and the institutions and the government had built a system that was actually designed to help them. They were not wrong to trust. They were wrong to trust that particular system, because that system was never designed for them. It was designed for the universities that collect the tuition upfront with zero risk, for the loan servicers that collect fees and interest for decades, for the collection agencies that pursue defaults, for the politicians who take donations from all of the above, and the 45 million Americans currently in repayment are the product the entire system runs on. Drop a comment below. Are you carrying student loan debt right now? And do you think you will ever fully pay it off? I want to know how many of you are in this, because the number is bigger than most people realize. Next video, why most people retire broke. Because for millions of Americans, the student loan crisis does not end when they pay off the debt. The years spent paying it off instead of building retirement savings create a hole that most people never fully recover from. Watch it next. Subscribe so you do not miss it.